Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the council chambers for our committee of the whole meeting on May 13th. So welcome everyone. Going to start with a call to order, and I'm wondering if there is looking for disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Asking if there's any. Okay, seeing no conflict of interest, we'll move to number 3, which is a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington confirm the agenda for the meeting held May 13th, 2019. And those agenda as follows. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McElwain. All in favor to the agenda? So carried. Good. Section 4, we have presentations. We have no presentations today. And number 5, we have delegations. I don't believe we have any delegations either, so this is fairly easy. So I see you made it a nice easy one there. Thank you. So 6.1, which is the operating results, and we have a report from Mark Bradey, Managing Director. So I turn it over to Mark.
All right, thank you. So to go through 6.1 and part of 6.2, I thought I'd actually do a presentation. So I've got probably about 25, 30 slides here that'll take us through those two reports for the most part, and then we'll come back and revisit those reports to get into any specifics if you have specific questions about the content in them. All right. So I'll take you through a slide deck that takes care of the following items. So we'll review quickly how the municipal budget works. Just want to keep that fresh in front of everybody's face, especially since there's some newer some new members to council this term. I'll take you through some of the highlights of the 2018 operating fund results, and then I'll touch base on the closed capital projects for 2018 and the impact that has on the general capital reserves for basically the tax supported general capital reserve, the water and the sewer general capital reserves. I'll give you an update briefly on the 2018 year-end status, and then lastly, one slide on future operating and capital updates to council. So this slide might look familiar to those that have been on council for a while. I'm sure it does. And for those that are new to council, I did go over this a few months ago, and we went through the budget. So just a refresher, left-hand side is the operating budget. These are sort of your day-to-day expenses. So your main thing is salaries and wages in there. That's about 50% of the operating budget. There's utilities, supplies, fuel, insurance, repairs and maintenance to our vehicles and equipment are seen for the most part through the operating budget. Unless they're significant, then and we know that they need to take place at the time of a budget, then they would be on the right-hand side and the capital budget side. Principal and interest payments on debt also go through the operating budget. There's a capital contribution that is built into the operating budget that goes to various reserve funds. So we have $800,000 built into the operating budget that goes into the general capital reserve each year and then is used to fund the capital budget. But we also have various capital contributions built in to fund the life cycle reserves, so your equipment and vehicle replacement reserves. And that's a significant chunk of change too, that again goes into a reserve fund and then funds the capital budget or those replacement schedules in the year that that money is required. So if fire trucks needed in 2019, then that money will go into the reserve fund and fund it, the replacement of that vehicle. What funds the operating budget? Well, it's the stuff further to the left there. Property tax is about half of the funding for the operating budget. User fees is a big chunk as well. There's also the ONPF grant goes through there. There's other grants such as gas tax and the OSIF grants actually go into the operating budget, but right away flow into the reserve funds, dollar for dollar, and then that money is used to fund the capital budget. Okay. So the right-hand side is the capital budget. Rule of thumb for that is capital budget items are not what you might think. They're not always tangible capital assets from an accounting standpoint. They're actually items that are over $5,000 and one time. Okay, the reason we do that, or the reason municipalities do that, is if you start sticking one-time $50,000 studies or more into an operating budget in a given year, you're going to get a tax rate that's going to spike, and then it's going to drop, and then it's going to spike, and then it's going to drop. You want to try to keep a tax rate that's fairly smooth from year to year so that people can do their own financial planning from year to year. So capital budgets typically are your big ticket items, your road reconstructions, new buildings, vehicles, pieces of equipment, and asset replacement. So the asset replacement are the items that are typically in those life cycle schedules that we have in the budget book. Sources of funding for the capital budget, got some kind of a different type in there. You've got development charges, grants can be significant in certain years. Developers also make contributions towards certain developments. And we could also use debt. And also you can see the arrow coming from reserves as well. All right, so that's just a quick refresher on trying to give you an idea of the interrelationships between the capital and operating budgets. Reserves are really the biggest link. Okay. So the township surplus policy is actually buried within the reserve and reserve funds policy that the township has, and it states that the year-end operating budget surplus is a source of funding for the general capital reserve. So what does that mean? Well, we have a year-end surplus, we close it out to the general capital reserve, it gets transferred to the general capital reserve. Then typically what happens is a report will come forward from staff making recommendations as to where we could use that surplus. So in the past, we've topped up the WSIB reserve because it was significantly underfunded. That was probably goes back about 6 or 7 years ago. There could be some tenders that come in over budget sometime in the summer, and one of the recommendations may be that we, top up the funding for that project so we can go ahead with it by using the year-end surplus from the year before. Or what happens more often than not, I think, is actually it just sits in the general capital reserve and we use it in the following year's budget. So it's additional funds that are used or available for use in the next year's capital budget. And essentially what that does is accelerates the projects within the 10-year capital forecast. Okay? So just a little bit of history of the surplus. I just went back 5 years. So got the year, we got the surplus amount, and then the percent of the tax-supported budget in that year. And then I just tried to highlight, here's kind of the main contributing factors to that surplus. And you'll see there is kind of a common theme there. Winter control pops up quite a bit, and probably no surprise there, and that winter control is one of the biggest line items in the township's budget. And it's obviously dictated by factors that are really out of our control. So what we do with that is we budget averages. All right, an annualized average is what we budget to, and obviously we've had variances over the past that contribute to the surplus over the past 5 years. Supplementary taxes are another one that makes a common appearance there, as I think investment income is a contributing factor a couple times as well. So what's the 2018 operating fund surplus? It's just shy of $400,000 at $392,832. That's a 1.5% variance from the total tax-supported operating budget in 2018. And the main sources of the surplus, and my report obviously gets into more detail about this, but the three main contributing factors are investment income, supplementary taxation, and then there was some restructuring in the IT department and some vacant positions throughout the year. Some call it gapping, basically, where you have a vacant position and it's left vacant for a couple months as we rehire somebody. So what I've done is I've taken I think it's Schedule A in the operating report, and just broken into little sections so we could deal with them individually. I've highlighted in orange items where the variance is more than $10,000. Okay, and those are the ones that I'll just sort of focus on as I go through the rest of these slides. So the administration variances, the mayor and council was a favorable variance of about $12,000. It's a pretty common theme over the past few years. It's that surplus within that division is derived from unused conference seminars and training. We did, if I remember in the 2019 budget, I think we held it the same actually as 2018. We might have reduced it a little bit. I got a feeling with this council so far, what we've seen is they're very active. You're very active in going to seminars and getting up to speed on things. We may actually have to increase that as we look to the 2020 budget. And we see this as we get new councils in, where certain councils are always going to seminars and training events, and then we have some councils that just don't. I think we've got a council this time around that's very active in that area, so it's something we'll have to look at when we get to the 2020 operating budget. Financial services had a favorable variance as well. It was about $32,000, and the main reason for that is there was a new capital financial analyst position in 2018. It was, I think, budgeted for the full year, and we actually didn't successfully hire somebody until I believe we were into May of last year. So that led to the majority of the favorable variance there. IT&S, favorable variance there is about $78,000, and main reason for that surplus is we completed the restructuring that started, I think it was in the summer of 2017 in IT, with a change in leadership essentially in the IT division. And the focus of that department has essentially changed from developing programs and so forth in-house to more of a software support role for staff, or an application support role, I guess is the correct term. And that's led to essentially some significant savings in salaries and benefits. There are also savings in professional fees and software charges as we move to more cloud-based services. General administration had an unfavorable variance of about $11,000, and again, this is one that was kind of out of our control. It was tax write-offs. Again, a difficult one to nail down a budget amount. We typically work to averages on that as well. There would have been a report, I think, went to council back in December or maybe early January on the write-offs that were made in 2018. So the next section, and these sections I realize do not coincide with, you know, our 4 departments that we have here, and infrastructure services and corporate services and community services, planning development. These sections I've split off are actually more tied to the financial information return, because that's how our general ledger's set up, because that's the end report we work to at the end of the year. That's the main report that goes to the government. The similarity, there are some definitely similarities in the groupings between the FIR and how our departments are set up here. So in the protection to person and property area, there's a couple of unfavorable variances for fire and building, and bylaw enforcement had a positive variance there. So for fire, the unfavorable variance is mainly due to just increased fire calls during the year. There was a slight increase in remuneration for volunteer firefighters in 2018 as part of the agreement that was settled with the Volunteer Firefighter Association, which I think ends in 2020, at the end of 2020. There was also additional, we call it personnel equipment costs, because part of that agreement had some footwear costs put in for, I think it was boots for the volunteers. So I believe the volunteer firefighter wages were over budget by about $80,000. And I think it's about a $400,000 line item for volunteer firefighter wages for calls and so forth. Building division, it may seem odd that there's an unfavorable variance there. They actually had a really good year. Problem is with the building department is when they have a really good year, there is the Building Code Act, which is sort of a side calculation we have to do. So it's not just the activities that go through the building department. There's also costs that come into the calculation from corporate services, like basically administration departments. There's the cost of replacing equipment and vehicles for the building department as well come into this calculation. So based on this side calculation, there's a $437,000 surplus from permitting activities. Well, we have to, under the Building Code Act, transfer that into a building code stabilization reserve. That reserve at the end of 2018 now has $1.85 million in it. So you will recall from the budget that we put in a capital project to review building permitting fees. And I think we're also looking at planning fees as well as part of it. It's not part of this calculation, but we wanted to look at the fees we are charging for building permits and planning just to make sure that we are recovering our costs and charging a fair price. Out of that report will dictate how much this reserve balance, or what the maximum reserve balance should be as well. So, like I said, building department actually had a really good year. It just looks bad because we have to then build in this transfer, which is an expense to a reserve. So the significant favorable variances in the building department were building permit revenue was actually $355,000 above the budget amount. And the budget amount's based on sort of a 5-year annualized average as well, because it's a very difficult number to try to nail down as well. And wages and benefits were actually $54,000 under budget. And I believe that was because some turnover in the department, so this was a gapping issue. So we had turnover in the department, took a while to get people hired. There was one fairly significant unfavorable variance though in the building department, and that was for consulting services. So that was for the hospital permit, because you're in a very specialized type of permit, and legal services for various zoning and building code violations. So the total of essentially consulting fees were about $41,000 over what we had budgeted for that department. Bylaw enforcement, so it was a favorable variance of about $32,000. Main reason for that is it was budgeted, bylaw enforcement start January 1, and the bylaw officer was not hired until around the end of April 2018. Transportation and health variances. So there's an unfavorable variance for public works and a favorable variance over $10,000 for cemeteries. So for public works, the unfavorable variance, about $150,000. A good chunk of it, about $72,000 of it stems from vehicle and equipment repair costs that exceeded budget, mainly due to essentially our aging vehicle and equipment. But it was precipitated mainly by 3 particular vehicles. There was 2 snow plows and a sidewalk machine where we had significant repairs on them. Fleet fuel costs exceeded the budget by about $35,000. You may recall that similar to this year, I guess, fuel costs were quite high at the start of 2018, then they dropped off to almost nothing. They're like they dropped really low in the fall, and then they've come back up again early this year as well. Revenue was also lower than expected. It was mainly due to a reduction in storm sewer frontage connections. Another one of those ones that we typically budget averages, because it's very tough to determine how many properties may connect. We thought we may get a bunch of connections last year because of the work being done around the Summerfields area, but a lot of them did not connect. And then many cost centers were under budget, like winter control. However, it was mainly, the main reason some of those cost centers like winter control were under budget is because of the machine time allocations were lower than anticipated. For cemeteries, there was a favorable variance there, which is actually quite large for a department the size of the cemetery division. It was about $31,000, and that's because revenues were higher than anticipated by about $11,000. So that's both individuals buying plots and grave open closes. And also investment income contributed a little bit to that. And maintenance costs were lower than expected by about $20,000. Parks, Rec, Culture, and Social Services variances. So there's a couple of them highlighted there. One's Parks and Recreation, which is unfavorable variance of about $95,000, and then other social services, which essentially is the Ferguson Laura downtown budget, had a negative variance of almost $50,000. So Parks and Recreation unfavorable variance. I remember we spoke about this back at budget time. There was some new legislation put in place in 2018 that required additional hours for guards. And there was an administration assistant contract position in aquatics put in place. Utility costs at the Sportsplex exceeded budget by about $29,000, which may seem like a lot, but please keep in mind the utilities budget for The Sportsplex alone is about $580,000 in 2018, so it was about a 5% variance. Concession and vending operated at a loss in 2018 of about $19,000, and you will recall also from the 2019 budget that we eliminated actually the sponsorship revenue amount that had been built into the budget for a few years. It was $25,000 budget in 2018, and there was no revenue received for sponsorships at all. So in 2019, we did eliminate that source of revenue out of the budget. Now, this was offset by some favorable variances, and there was a significant favorable variance in aquatics. I think aquatics revenue exceeded budget by about $70,000, which is quite significant. Summer programming was also did quite well in 2018. So these are summer camps. And hall rentals, which is an odd one because for years it was actually a negative variance as we saw a decrease in hall rentals. Geez, I bet you over the past decade. So it was good to see that it actually started to build back up again. And there was an unfilled customer service representative position for a good chunk of the year last year as well. So the downtown cost centers, again, I think this is when we spoke a bit about the budget as well, because in the past we just had Fergus downtown and the Laura downtown cost centers. We created actually 2 extra cost centers in there. Now we have Fergus and Laura downtown, but we have maintenance cost center for both and a beautification cost center for both. So beautification is overseen by community services, and the maintenance piece is overseen now by Public Works. In the past, with just having the 2 cost centers and you have multiple departments with hands in the pot, it's difficult to keep control of costs, as you probably can see. Now we have one department in charge of beautification, one department in charge of maintenance, so we should be able to track the costs a little bit better, and there'll be some accountability built in there as well. But there were some pretty significant cost overruns this past year for this department. The snow removal behind the Fergus Library exceeded budget by about $14,000. Maintenance costs for flower beds, hanging banners, lights, and flower pots exceeded budget. One thing I found there was $5,500 of concrete work that was done and that was put in these budgets as well, and there was also an asphalt repair of about $2,200 in there. So start adding these things up, and you get close to this $48,500 negative variance within these departments. Planning and development variances. Only one item here, that's the economic development, and it's all pretty much stemming out of the marketing expense line item within economic development. It has a budget, or it had a budget in 2018 of $42,500. The actual was $23,000, so the variance was about $19,000. Other variances. So taxation and PIL revenue. So remember at the start I said supplementary taxation. There was a significant favorable variance there. It was about $270,000, that favorable variance, and it is in that it's in the taxation and PIL line item. And the main reason for the SUPs being well above the budget amount is some significant subdivisions were actually picked up by MPAC in the assessment last year. So that'd be Summerfields Phase 1 and 2, Westminster on the south end of Fergus, Laura Ridge Phase 3 on the south end of Laura. There's a couple other here, Granite Homes and Oxford Green Developments, which I think is in Salem. Other revenues and expenses, there's a favorable variance there, and the main reason for that is investment income. And the main reason investment income came out in well above the budget amount is, first of all, we are conservative on that line item. We have to be, because in years when the economy essentially goes into a recession, which we're probably due for one soon, it's been over 10 years, of course, interest rates drop. We're going to earn less in our money. The last thing you want to do is go into an operating budget and you have to, first of all, you're probably going to have less user fees coming in, but now you've got less investment income coming in. now you're looking at potentially service cuts because you've got this void to fill within a reduced revenue that's coming in. It's not a good scenario to go through. We went through it back in 2008, if I remember right. And we actually had a deficit somewhere around in there, 2008, 2009, we had a deficit, which usually we have these nice surpluses, we have extra money for capital projects. Well, in a year when you actually end up with a deficit, money comes from the general capital reserve to cover it off. So it means there's less money to go towards capital projects. So most municipalities play it fairly conservative on supplementary taxes, and they play it fairly conservative on investment income as well. But what did happen, or what led to the big surplus in investment income last year is we were fortunate that there were 3 increases, quarter point increases in prime rate last year, which obviously led to a lot extra interest earned on our term deposits and on our cash balances at the bank. So we'll shift gears and talk a bit about the capital fund. So just a little bit of background. Annually, financial services staff go around and meet with various senior managers on all the capital projects, and this usually happens in January as part of our year-end process. And we try to determine which projects can be closed. And a rule of thumb we kind of use on that is if you only got about $5,000 left in cost to come in, let's close the thing, because the longer capital projects stay open, habit is that the more costs seem to get put towards there. Once consultants know a capital project is closed, they're not going to charge anything else there anymore. We do have accounts set up to invoices obviously still come in. There might be $3,000 invoice for a project we close. We do have accounts set up for that to take care of that. So we probably this past year we closed off a significant number of projects, which is good. It's got to be at least 50 we closed off. But as you close off capital projects, it does result in reserve impacts. Because if a project is under budget when you go to close it, you're going to transfer money back to various reserves. And if a project's over budget when you go to close it, you got to move some money from the reserves to close it off. So the net impacts are shown there. So the general capital reserve actually increased by $225,000, which is great news. Waterworks general capital reserve, about almost 50,000 got returned to the reserve. And then on the sanitary sewer side, there was a small amount that $15,000 that led to a reduction of the general capital reserve for sanitary. So what I did in the next couple slides is just kind of summarized, instead of giving you a big list of all the capital projects, I pulled out the ones that were over about plus or minus $25,000 when we closed them out. So there's your summary of 6 projects, I guess, over $25,000 that had an impact on the general capital reserve. Okay, and a couple bridges, there's pre-engineering, the Sportsplex Pad A roof replacement. We knew that was coming when it went out to tender. We left some money in that capital project instead of moving it out when the tender was awarded because we didn't know what they were going to find when they ripped that roof up. They could have found something that could have cost, I think we originally left about $100,000 in there, and then we moved some out. Right, so this is just, there was only one item that was over $25,000 that had an impact on the Waterworks General Capital Reserve. And I think, Colin, this was just money we had set aside to do an inspection, and we did the inspection ourselves, I think, because there was really no cost out here, and we determined that it needed to be done, and it's, I think it's in 2020 in the capital budget for $400,000. Yeah. And then there's 2 projects there for sanitary that had an impact. And I thought it would slip this in here instead of trying to explain it when we actually got to the report. So this is just a snippet of attachment A that's in the capital report. So I just wanted to kind of give you some background on how this is set up. So the project numbers left-hand side, you got your project description, that's taken right out of the budget descriptions. Budget year is showing what budget years there was actually money approved to that project. Okay, so this gives you the history of how long some of these projects have been open. Budget is the budget amount that was actually approved through a formal annual budget. This is not adjusted by when a tender is awarded or anything like that, okay? This is just, in 2015, Work Tech Upgrade got $10,000 in budget money, okay? Actual is, there's your actual expenditures and revenues to date, or to December 31st. And the over-under budget, another way of looking at that could be what's left to spend or how much are we overspent to date, okay? And then we try to do a very brief comment, and these comments are gathered by sitting down with each of the managing directors and going through all of their projects that they're responsible for, okay? Year-end status for 2018, just where we at right now. Well, the audit field work was done in the first couple weeks of April. Auditors are actually back in tomorrow to take a look at the consolidation and so forth. We're still waiting on the consolidated, Center Wellington Energy Group, which needs to be built into the township financial statements as well. We're supposed to, I think, get that later this week. Currently working on the township's 2018 financial information return, which is due May 31st, and we're on target to get that done in time. And our hope is that the audited financial statements will be presented to council in June. And I think we're looking at that June 10th date if possible, but we'll discuss that with the auditors tomorrow to see if they can meet that timeline. And these operating capital updates, historically we've done them just semi-annually, so you typically got one in April and May for December. And the reason that one's kind of late is because we want to make sure the auditors have been in and done their thing and not found anything. And then typically one came in August for June. We're now looking at doing these quarterly, so we've already got the March capital one is ready to go. We just got to pull together the March operating one. So yeah, I'll be coming back before you 4 times a year to give you updates on financial status. So I think that's it for the slides. Yep. So I don't know if anybody has any questions specific to the report or the slides, but we can move on to individual reports, I guess, and if you have any specific questions to those, I can address them. Yep.
I had a question on the pre-engineering line item where there was $100,000 savings, and could you explain that one, please?
Yeah, for sure. Through Councillor Van Leeuwen. So we, as part of that capital account, there was the township's 50% share of the environmental assessment for the 2 structures on Middlebrook Place. So the one bridge spanning the Grand River, the truss structure there, and then another culvert just a little bit north of that. So the township is a funding partner for that. I can say just last week I just processed that invoice, sent it over to finance. So we are basically committed to 50% of the EA costs of that, which is going to be around $45,000. And so that was to be funded out of that pre-engineering budget. Mark's nodding. Okay. And so in order, instead of having that invoice kind of sit out there and having that account stay open just to pay that, Mark suggested closing that account and then funding that separately. So the first invoice was going through that. So at the end, really the favorable variance is close to around 50,000.
I'm just a little surprised that pre-engineering budget is being used for EA work. I guess I was thinking that was more being spent on our engineering consultants than our environmental assessment.
No, that was presented in the budget. I think it was the 2017 capital budget. I believe that was. Yeah, and so we listed the projects and the breakdown that made up that amount at that time. So, we're being consistent. Yeah.
Councillor Kitchers?
For the building division, what's the cap for the reserve on that? And when will we be hitting that?
Through Councillor Van Leeuwen, the report or the study that was done to calculate that is a 2004 or 2005 study that calculated building and planning fees. And I believe it was about 1.25 times revenue. Yes. In the building department was the target balance for the building division. That is an out-of-date calculation as of this point, and we were looking to update that study this year. So we'd get a more concrete estimate of what the new target is, because the study is well over 10 years old.
Continue.
Yeah, follow up.
In the past, when I've asked about that, it was around $2 million, and we were going to hit that target, and we were thinking we were going to maybe lower the building fees. Is that part of that study? Okay.
Yes, the study that was budgeted for in 2019 is to relook at building and planning fees and recalculate what full cost fees should be based on revenue targets. So that'll be included in the study.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen. I have three questions, actually. First question is for Mark. Mark, you mentioned growth and assessment 2019. What is the total amount of new taxation coming from that new assessment coming on stream in this year?
Through Councillor Van Leeuwen, we won't get that number from MPAC or the county until about October, November of this year. So it's a number that grows throughout the year, and we honestly don't know until we're really 3/4 of the way through the budget what the assessment growth is really going to be.
Not the growth in assessment, but the net new taxation as a result of that growth.
It's directly related to the calculation. So when we get the assessment growth percentage, we can calculate new taxation because of growth, and we won't have those estimates until fall of this year.
Okay, second question? Thanks, Councillor. Second question is, there's a variance in the Sportsplex booth. Can we drill down there? What's the reason for that unfavorable variance?
Sorry, I didn't catch all that at the Sportsplex, sorry.
If I heard you
Concession,
correctly,
oh, yeah. So what's the actual amount?
concession. Just, can you drill that 19,000 down for me? Starting, Mark, with what were the sales? What are the concession sales? And for the year, also, what are the wages for the concession, and what is the reason for the unfavorable variance?
I can give you the numbers here, but you gotta bear with me, I gotta find them in here. So Sportsplex, I'm gonna have to give you rounded numbers here, but labor applied and payroll overhead was about $57,000, and supplies looked to be about $61,000, and revenues, gotta add up a couple numbers here because it includes vending as well. Vending was, well, the sum of the two is about $99,000. Hopefully the math works on that.
So we had sales of 99,000, wages of 57, and cost of goods sold 61, resulting in $19,000 loss.
Yep.
Why then is the wages so high rather than sales?
So a lot of those positions that work in the concession booth are minimum wage. So when minimum wage went to $14, we had a large increase in our wage costs at the booth. So staff are aware that there is this gap in performance in revenues at the booth, and we're looking at ways to change that. So we have taken immediate action now and changed. We're operating the booths no longer as of April during the daytime hours, only in the evenings and weekends. We are also planning to issue out, which is probably more what you want to know, what are we going to do about it? Because it's already happened. It's difficult for us to undo that situation with the change in minimum wage impacting our overall results. So we're looking at doing an expression of interest out to see if we can find a third-party vendor interested in operating our booths and get out of the concession booth business as a municipality, because the cost of food and the cost of minimum wage, the interest in buying food and what it would cost for us to recover that is just not there anymore. It is an industry trend, and if you look at the new arena that was built in Listowel, it was built without a concession booth. And I can think of many municipalities who are closing their booths and only offering vending services or looking for a third-party booth. I would, operator of their booth. It is a constant trend right now that has been happening over the last couple of years.
Go over your follow-up.
Third question is regarding the hospital. Thanks, Pat. Actually, regarding the building department, Brad, I noticed we have an unfavorable variance of 41,000 in the building department. Brad, we have, how many building inspectors we have? 5, or is it 6? And really what I'm asking, Brad, is what would be the need for having a consultant for the hospital in the building area when we have our own 5?
Official and 4 inspectors currently, and we're short 1 at the moment. But at the time that the hospital made application, we were under that staffing level, and so council approved us using an external person to review that permit. And the permit went in stages, so when they got their first permit, so we used that, we made use of that consultant. It's coming out of the fee that we have a surplus in. So it's funded by the building permit fees overall. So that was just a matter of timing at the time. The hospital is an important building. It's a sophisticated building, and we needed to make sure that we got the permit reviewed on time, so we're not holding up the hospital. So we used external services. At the time they applied, we just didn't have the people to have done it.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, just to clarify, it is a dollar for dollar reduction, I guess, in that transfer that goes to the building code reserve. It's 100% expense in that calculation.
Councillor Kitches.
Thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen. I need a clarification on the public works. It talks about all the favorables, and then on the unfavorables, on the second paragraph, it says lower than expected snowfall and large, and then it says lower is budget. So that would have been a savings. Should I have said higher than budgeted?
Sorry, what page are you? I'm just trying to find it here.
Page 9.
Could be a typo. Right here.
Or could you explain that? Because if the snowfall's lower, we would have saved money.
Oh, this is actually getting into the, I think, lower than expected snowfall and large vehicles on the ground. Oh, yes, this is actually speaking not specifically to the snow, the machine recovery. So, again, this is a difficult one to explain, but you've got, let's step back. Every piece of equipment and vehicles that Public Works and Environmental and Parks and Rec have a charge-out rate essentially with them. So there's almost like a time card done for each vehicle and piece of equipment. So each time, say a vehicle is a $30 charge out rate to it, if you use that vehicle for doing snowplow, it'll charge $30 to that cost center snowplow, okay? The other side of the entry goes to machine recovery, which is actually a credit, so it's seen as like revenue. So if you don't have these vehicles available for use, you're not going to be able to charge them across the various cost centers. Okay, it's a confusing concept, but it's a way of allocating costs like fuel for vehicles, insurance, depreciation, I guess. I think that gets most of them. Repairs and maintenance, obviously, which is very significant. It's a way of allocating those costs to various cost centers. And when I say cost centers, I mean like winter control, gravel resurfacing, storms drain, cleanouts and things like that, okay? So it really, what I'm saying is we budgeted for, say, $500,000 of machine recovery, which is almost like a revenue, really. Probably that report asked for an additional $85,000 on funding. Do you see that line item there? Yeah. So in this case, to get your true what's left, you actually need the 125 less the 120 spent. There's actually only about $4,400 left there.
Go ahead, Councilor Kitchers.
So the city view is over, it has extra funds, so that was just, is that offsetting that cemetery fund then? Is that how that's working?
No, we actually created two separate capital projects. So there's one that's cemetery management system, which is also city view as well, okay? Which we asked for $85,000 for, and then it appears that we did City View software implementation phase 2. The reason it's called phase 2 is because that was the second piece. Phase 1 was actually the cemetery project. So phase 2, we had $350,000 went through a formal budget. And that's actually, we never asked for any additional money on that. Oh, you want the line item is item 10. Sorry, yeah, that's probably the best way to refer to it. So again, I can't remember all the details, but I know with the cemetery one, we had a budget amount and then we knew it wasn't enough because that's when we discovered City View actually was able to add a cemetery module to it. That's when we came back to council and said, hey, we need another must have been $85,000 to implement this.
It says here, 2015, so was there a top-up then for that cemetery management one? Like, cause it just says 2015, the 40,000.
Yeah, so what that means is in the 2015 capital budget, there was a project called Cemetery Management System and $40,000 was put towards it. And then probably sometime in 2015 or 2016, there was a report that went to council saying, we're looking at doing City View for the building department. By the way, there's a module that actually handles cemeteries and we hear it's great, so can we get another 85,000 to do that? So that's actually phase 1 to the City View. Is that correct, Harry? Okay, good.
Okay. Other questions for council, from council? No? Or we could just open it up if there's questions for a section, we can ask it that way. Does that work as well? Is there other questions for a certain section? Just pick one. Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Item 32, where it was a project put on hold unsuccessful for Connecting Links 2018 grant application. Is that listed in our 10-year asset management budget?
It's the St. David Street piece.
Through Councillor Van Leeuwen. So that has been identified as a high priority in the township's asset management plan for full reconstruction. So not just repaving, but also replacing the water main, sanitary sewer, large sections of the storm sewer as well in that section. So I think the strategy that we've been talking about is kind of let the dust settle on the construction in downtown Fergus. I think that's been some of the feedback we've heard anyway as staff, And so we are kind of, I think, in the budget looking at around a 2023 construction period, just to give 5 years between the St. David Street Bridge and this construction. So it was Tower Street in 13, St. David Street Bridge in 18, and 2023 is kind of what we're thinking for this next section of the connecting link. So.
Yeah, Andy, go ahead.
For this one, it was an unusual request because we actually just looked for the design funding, if I recall, on this one, to see if we could get the design, get that approved, and then go for a secondary. And that was something new for making that type of application to the connecting link. We already had conversations with the ministry staff about that, and they said, yeah, that might be an interesting concept, and unfortunately, we weren't approved for that. So it wasn't the entire project we weren't approved for, it was just asking for all the design and approval work that we would then ask for secondary funding for the construction work. So it may be still the tack that we look at to do in the future, depending on what the connecting link looks like.
Thanks, and it might be wise that we take a bit of a break downtown construction, right? So I do think that's, everyone needs a little bit of a breather now, so good choice. Councilor McCray, yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Another question for Colin related to item number 85. Fergus Well F1 chlorine room relocation, design underway. I'm just curious, I guess first of all, how much chlorine is stored there? And is the design capable of withstanding, say, worst case scenario that the dam bursts and that area is flooded? Will it withstand so we don't get a chlorine gas release?
Yeah, through Councillor Van Leeuwen. Yeah, so the design for to relocate the chlorine room is underway. We've like it's currently, we'll set up a tour at some point of that facility. I think we've got a date in June kind of earmarked for that, but it's kind of shoehorned into the existing facility, and there's not, like typically, like we like to have 2 exits coming out of a chlorine room, so it's a bit of a health and safety issue. Is the new design, you know, being designed to handle a flood, I think is your question, if that area is underwater. That's a good question. I'm not sure I've got the answer to that right away. I can check with the design team to see, you know, get their comments on that issue. But certainly, yeah, we have at any given time usually a couple of cylinders of chlorine gas that we use as a disinfectant for the water supply. But in terms of, you know, is it being designed to, you know, be resilient enough to stay in place during a flood? I'd have to get back to you on that one.
Councilor Dunsmore?
I just wanted to ask you a quick question around line 34, which is the Highway 6 water main trunk. We're still waiting on MTO approval. Have we heard anything back from them in the last year? 6 years?
Yeah, no. Thank you for the question through Councillor Van Leeuwen. Yeah, so Andy and I and Dave Donaldson from Triton went to meet with with staff in London. This was maybe a month ago now, or yeah, just over a month. And just to keep things moving along, they did have some questions back to us that came back to us kind of around the meeting with the ministers at Roma. And so we thought it would be best to sit down with them and kind of review their questions. Leaving that meeting, it did sound promising that things were going in the right direction. I think their main concern is the water main and the sanitary sewer crossing right at the intersection of Highway 6 and Side Road 18. 18, right? Yeah, 18. And so we talked about, well, perhaps there's an opportunity to make the crossing happen a little further to the south and get out, because I guess they're looking at what could happen to the highway 100 years down the road is kind of their frame of reference. And so by potentially moving that a little further to the south, they seemed amenable to that. So we're looking at that in detail right now. They also came back after our meeting and inquired about perhaps directional drilling or directional boring the entire sanitary sewer and water main. And so obviously there'd be a cost, a pretty significant cost associated with that. Of course, we were always planning to directional drill the crossing. We're not closing the highway. We're not doing that open cut method. We would be directionally boring that section of the water main and also the sanitary sewer. But they have also asked us to investigate directional drilling the sides coming up either side of the highway. Again, so we're doing our due diligence. We're in the process of pulling together a response for them from the ministry. So we're talking to some directional drilling companies. This is not typical normal construction practices that they're asking us to look at. So just to get an idea of feasibility and if so, cost associated so we can respond back to them.
So we've been at this since 2013, and they're still asking us to pursue other avenues in 2019. And did the minister get back to anybody at all?
So at our meeting at Rome, the minister did say they would follow up, so that was the follow-up meeting we had with the staff. As Colin said, we did feel we walked away from that meeting with just one issue to take a look at, being moving out of the intersection. And subsequent to that, we've also been asked for the directional boring. So that may be something we need to go back to the minister and also Ted, our MPP and Ted Arnott.
Colin, just so I can understand, why would they want us to directional bore north-south? It seems, is there something in the way that would cause us to say that's a good practice? Because it seems like you could normally dig off the road allowance in order to put that in.
Yeah, no, they're really concerned that as the excavation occurs, we actually have the water main and the sanitary sewer kind of stacked on top of each other. Water main at the bottom, or sanitary sewer at the bottom, water main up top. It's in the north end of Fergus. There's a sandy type of soil that sometimes once you start digging, it just starts flowing like water almost. And maybe some of you are familiar with it. And so they're concerned that if we're doing this open cut, that what could happen is, the contractor could lose control of the excavation and the highway essentially could, be lost as well or damaged as part of that. So that's their main concern. We as a project team, Triton as well, we've extended the water main already up to, what used to be Ken Weeks is now the Opportunity Shop. So the water main's already been extended using conventional techniques. The sanitary sewer as well, using what we call trench boxes. And so we're very confident that we can continue using the same methods that were done, I guess probably about 12, 15 years ago now, and continue on the side of the highway, not impact the highway whatsoever. But MTOs just, they're being hard to convince. So again, we're trying to work with them as best we can.
Thanks. Any other questions? Councillor Kittrus and then Councillor Cray.
Thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen. The first question, I have several questions here. The first question is for number 33. And it has its over 562. And there's still asphalt work is that part of that 45 there? Is that going to be the 45,000? Or is there additional funds on top of that?
Yeah, so through, Mark's just kind of looking that up. So we've got, just kind of tidying things up. Actually, use this as a bit of an announcement. We are looking at doing surface asphalt on the bridge and the approaches back into the Queen Street, Bridge Street intersection and up to St. Andrews intersection. So that is planned for Thursday night. And the contractor's going to start about 7 p.m. And work through the night and complete the surface asphalts, all the line painting before dawn. That's their deadline before the traffic starts. So that is happening this spring. We are just tidying up. There's some concrete. The lookout area at the northwest corner was completed just recently. So there's a really beautiful kind of viewing area of the river and the bridge itself, and the Fergus Marketplace building. And then we're also working with the BIA just to get some benches and planters kind of set up for the summer for the area as well, just to kind of beautify it this spring. So sorry, no, that doesn't answer your question, but maybe Mark can step in there now.
No, but that filled the time nicely. I got your answer though. Remember I said there's 10%? Yeah, you found another one of them. So again, you got to look at the revenue total and compare it to the expense. So yeah, it looks like we are actually overspent by about $90,000 and the project isn't done yet though. And it's all in, yeah, as Dan says, it's all in water basically.
On the 33, there's another 90 over.
The 33 you're getting from, oh, 30, yeah, go ahead, Dan, I think.
The way it's shown, if you compare actual expenditures to budget, it's over by 562,000. But through the tender approval process, we allocated more funds to that project, so we're actually only about 90,000 over
Okay.
instead of the 562. And that 90,000 is sitting in water actually, where we're actually under budget for roads and sanitary.
Okay. So the total cost of that project, though, in total revenues, will be still 4.5, or is that not accurate?
Yeah, 4.5 million, yeah, under the revenue column, the total
Okay.
there, yeah.
And there isn't any more being allocated to that?
I don't think we topped it up in the 2019 budget that I recall.
So that's like
that
the final,
should be the final, yeah.
number? Okay,
Yeah.
okay. That was my first question.
And that, just the 4.5 should tie into the tender award when that report came forward. I can't remember when that was now. Into 2017, wasn't it? Yeah.
Turn on your mic there and go ahead,
Can
Councilor.
I ask another question? Okay. 42, just like some clarification. The pedestrian, like they have West Mill Street and the pedestrian bridge, so is that the total for the whole project, the revenues there? Or are there more monies allocated, like for the pointing? Is that going to be added to that project? So that's not the total then for the project, the revenue, the 3.5?
Yeah, that's correct. This is as of December 31st, 2018. The total was 3.5 million. Again, you gotta look under the revenue column on that one because we had multiple reports to council on that project. Where money was, additional funding was put towards that project. Excuse me. But yes, through the 2019 budget, there was a repointing project and lighting. Yeah.
So,
I-
what additional funds would be in that project? Like, what's the total for that?
Yeah, we'd have to go to, I don't know if Dan can get to he's looking through the 2019 budget yet now, but that'll actually make an appearance on our March report. Okay, because there were, as I mentioned in my slides, I'm doing a quarterly report on capital updates, so it'll look just like this, but it'll be as of March 31st,
Oh, okay,
2018.
okay.
But Dan's got the.
The repointing and lighting in the 2019 budget was an additional 350,000.
Okay. And is the 295 there, is there also another one because of the allocation of the contract? Like that we had to spend more money on that too? Like because they asked for more funds? Is that this year's too?
That's, we'll get more explanation on that later on, but
Okay.
we spoke on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions, Ian? Go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Item 105, little folks pre-engineering costs. What are those?
Yeah. Through Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. We'll change it. I'll go with that. Yeah, we'll figure it out eventually. Yeah, so the little folks, we set up that account back in, looks like 2013. Once kind of Pearl came to town and started looking at the mill redevelopment, the redevelopment on the south side, and recognizing that, you know, the township really wanted to leverage some improvements at that time as part of their design, look at things that, you know, needed to be redone as part of the township's work. And so, so through that budget, things like the Elora wastewater treatment plant outfall, you know, like there's goes right through Pearl's property now down Ross Street. And so there was a bit of evaluation and work. So Pearl, I think, paid for a significant amount, but the township picked up some of the costs associated with that too. So with the redevelopment of the parking lot, looking at relocating storm sewer outlets, there's kind of preliminary designs that were done, you know, design calculations. So these were some of the things that the township wanted to make sure we're getting completed to our satisfaction. So that account was created to ensure that work was completed.
More questions, Councillor? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan, if you want to add to that.
We're just bringing up the account history in that project. Most of the expenditures came in 2014. In the last 2 years, we only allocated $3,000 to that project. So it's really related to costs from really 2013, 2014.
Very early on cost then, okay. All right, good. Other questions from council? Councillor Kitchus?
Item 43, is the balance of the 2.8, is that to finish the Gart Shore, Garifraxa area of that project? Or is there a big savings there?
Through Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Part of it is that we did have favorable tender pricing. There is a substantial amount due back to the developer. We're just waiting on actual costs to come in before we actually reconcile what's due back to the developer. And a few of the items listed in that whole project are actually deposits relating to work the developer's doing. For example, sidewalk across the frontage of their property. So it's work yet to be done. So it's really a combination of the three that's adding up to the $2.8 million variance.
Good. Councillor Kitchus?
Item 140, which is urban forestry, it has over 4 years, 560,000, but we haven't spent $167,000. I was wondering why we keep increasing that every year when we have funds left over that we haven't spent over those 4 years.
I'll speak to that one. So if you recall, during the 2019, Matthew came forward with a projected program that included funding from that we haven't spent, as well as future funding, being the 2019 year. So that was presented as part of the budget to expend all of those funds, and why we rationalized the funding we needed to also have in 2019. So some of it was the fact that we're getting some of the emerald ash borer trees removed, but we just haven't been able to get back to planting some of those.
Good, and I guess we'll see these things updated when we get the March report again as well, so we'll see how it progresses and works through that. So it's a good report there. Are there any other questions from council on this report? Seeing none, then, and we do have a recommendation before us, and it's a two-part there, that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receive report COR 2019-26, dated May 13, 2019, for information, and that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington allocate $20,000 from the General Capital Reserve to the Council Chamber Audio Capital Project. Can I get a mover for that? Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that carries. So that'll bring us to 6.3, which is a 2020 budget schedule. So we have a report from Dan Wilson, our Managing Director. So I'll turn it over to you, Dan.
Thank you. This report is in front of council to preset the schedule for the 2020 budget process. I know it feels like just yesterday we finished the 2019 budget process, but because of the election, we're in the fortunate situation of passing two budgets in 1 year. We have a few objectives in setting this budget timeline. The first is to have budget approval before the end of 2019. That allows us to seek out tender and quotation process results early in 2020, and we usually get fairly favorable results from the competitive tendering process if we can get them out fairly early in the budget year. The second objective is to provide council with opportunities to provide direction in the budget early on in the process, and I believe that was discussed through the 2019 budget process to provide more opportunities in that situation. The third is to provide sufficient public consultation, and the fourth is to allow staff the necessary time to develop and refine the budget. With that, we have a number of key milestones identified within the timeline. Approval of the timeline itself tonight, June 3rd of this year, through the committee of the whole meeting, have a budget directions report and discussion, which would give council the opportunity to provide high-level direction on the budget before we actually initiate the budget process. So that would be a report from staff as well as discussions and potential resolutions coming from council to provide that direction. Through the summer, staff would be working on the draft budget, and then we would have another meeting with council on September 9th, which we're calling the Budget Impacts Report and discussion. At that time, we'll have more information on some of the more significant impacts that will be coming forward in the 2020 budget, and we can have a further discussion with council about what we see as the key drivers of the 2020 budget. In addition, on September 9th, we're proposing that we take budget delegations from the public, which would give the first opportunity for the public to provide comments on the 2020 budget process, again, before we get too far in finalizing the draft budget. September 13, we're proposing releasing a budget survey that will be developed throughout the summer. October 2nd, we're proposing a budget public open house where we would have a presentation to the public on the 2020 budget process and again some of the key drivers we know of at that point in time, and something similar to our key open house project sessions where we can have booths available for staff to man and the members of the public to ask questions and get feedback. October 11th, close the budget survey. November 22nd, we make the draft 2020 budget book available to the public and to council. We're suggesting budget deliberations on December 3rd and 5th. We've left a day gap between the two dates to give time for staff to prepare for the second day and time for council to actually prepare for the second day as well. We would allow budget delegations at the December 3rd meeting as well, so that's where the public has had a chance to see the draft budget book and they can appear as a delegation to council at that point in time. December 9th, we've set aside as an extra day of budget deliberations if needed. with the goal of having approval of the budget at the council meeting on December 16th. So we feel through this budget process, we've been able to meet the 4 objectives I identified earlier. We're using many of the additional committee of the whole meetings that were established by council in this schedule, and I think it provides with a really good process that we could use for the 2020 budget process.
Good, thanks, Dan. And I like the fact that we're gonna budget delegations way earlier on September 9th, so it gives a little more time to discuss them and put them, if we can, into the budget think tank, I guess we want to call it. So it's good. Questions from council on this report and schedule? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Question for Dan, if I can. Dan, you mentioned the surveying. We've done a number of surveys, and you'll remember, Dan, you and I both studied at Laurier. We took Biz 255, Biz 275. We studied proper surveying techniques, things like survey bias, things like random sampling, things like stratifying the sample. And the purpose of all those things is so that surveys are accurate and unbiased. So how can we then implement a survey that is accurate and stratified and unbiased? Can you incorporate that into your budgetary surveying techniques?
Through Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen, yes, we can certainly look at the techniques of preparing that survey. I personally think that there is no perfect survey. You need to take the results of a survey and use them as input, but not as concrete evidence of evidence in one direction or another. But I think it would be useful in conjunction with the public open house. I think using the public open house to get public feedback as well as the survey provides, and the budget delegations provides 3 mechanisms of providing public input through the budget process, and we'll certainly ensure we spend the time in getting the survey as correct as possible before we release it.
Go ahead, follow up.
Dan, as you know, if we don't have an unbiased survey that is accurate, then the results are pretty much useless because they don't tell us anything. So we have to do more than just look at this. We need to have a survey that's accurate and unbiased. Otherwise, there's no point doing a survey at all. How can we make sure that we do this? If we're going to survey, we want to do it accurately. Like, these are basic statistical techniques. We have to do it this way. Do you agree, or?
I think just adding to Dan's point, I mean, part of the survey, whether you want to call it a survey or just general engagement, is for those members of the community who don't have access to being able to come up to the public meeting or attending our meetings as well. I look at what other municipalities are doing. They're using very similar tools. And for our size of our community, we actually are receiving more feedback through the budget process than what larger municipalities, say even town of Newmarket, is receiving. Doing very similar types of communication, very similar types of surveys, and things of that nature. So I think the challenge is trying to give the community the most amount of opportunities to provide that feedback to council in order to make the decisions that council has with the final say at the budget meetings.
Councillor McAway.
Thanks, Steve. Can I suggest, just to follow up on Bob's concern, because it's also a concern we've all voiced over the various surveys over the last few years, perhaps before that survey goes out to the public, the council have an opportunity to review it to see if the questions make sense to us as well as to staff, because we bring a different perspective to the questions that are being put in the survey.
Yeah, we can do that. Clear? Okay, so we'll expect to see that then. Thank you. Councilor McRae.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. I'd like to just say that I also agree with both Councillors Foster and Councillor McElwain that I have some concerns about surveys in general, and that I think the public also is leery of the surveys, and I think we do need to sort of have a council review with staff to look at the survey questions that we're proposing to ask to ensure that they are going to provide us with the answers that we're hoping to get from the public in terms of their views on the budget. Also, the other thing I just want to raise as well is that when we talk about having that budget public presentation, is that we look at how best can we communicate to the public to let them know there's an opportunity for them to participate in the process, and how can we ensure that we're getting as much information out to them to say, hey, come out to our open house, here's where you can see stuff on our website to get an idea of what we're doing, and perhaps maybe look at what other communities have done to get that budget information out to the public so that they're better informed as to what we're proposing.
Yeah, so maybe we can see if prior to the survey, then we'd definitely have to do an information campaign on that as well. So good. Other Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen. When we talked about the budgeting process earlier this year and had a resolution concerning a citizen advisory budget process, which was defeated, we talked about the budget process and getting more meetings in. Now, there are some new councillors that, you know, because we had the election year, it was very rushed and it was at the last minute, but for myself, that has been in budget. This is very similar to what we've always done. And I'm sort of wondering, what exactly are we really, you know, doing that much different? The June meeting, originally, when I saw it in a schedule, it had 2 meetings in June to develop the actual proper budget process and talk about that. Now we have one that looks like a 3-hour meeting or a 2-hour meeting. And basically, in 2017, we had 6 or 7 meetings because there were some issues brought up in the 2017 budget, you know, about 4 or 5 issues. We had several meetings. This is not very much different than that. So when we had defeated and did a little bit of brainstorming at that earlier meeting, we were looking, well, some of us were, looking for something that had starts the budget process earlier and has the principles of it earlier. And I don't see anything here that actually describes that fundamentally that's different from any other year. We're still going to have a rush of 2 or 3 days at the end, which is what we were trying to not have. And so I'm just wondering, how is this any different than what we've done in years before?
So a couple points. One, we are starting the process significantly earlier. We typically started back late September or October in previous years. Here we're looking at bringing it forward into June as well as September. The June 3rd date that we are noting is exactly around that, of setting what are those principles council would like to see within the 2020 budget, setting directions so that the intent is that we have those earlier discussions in the June and September meetings so that when we do get to the budget discussions, the numbers are meeting those objectives as set out by council in those earlier meetings. Having delegations earlier in September and then following up in December, what we're looking at is being able to have those questions asked earlier in the process so we can address them through the budget. I can tell you right now, I don't think we'll have all the money is required in the 2020 budget to speak to every request coming in from the budget. So that'll be a balancing act of looking at what we can afford and what we can't afford. But by starting those budget discussions earlier in June, the resolution that we have from council with regards to sex additional meetings are with regards to operating or infrastructure as well as financial. So what we've done is looked at the budgets, adding some of those meetings to this for the budget, as well as using a couple of those meetings. The June 10th date, what we're bringing back is the water supply master plan as being one of the most largest operations that we're looking at. And in order to have an afternoon or longer into the evening, if council so wishes, to have a long discussion about the water supply master plan, as it's a key impact on our operations. So those are what we've been looking at for those 6 additional meetings, balancing off with additional public meetings with regards to the budget process, as well as a couple of meetings. And today, you're seeing that we're having not a long agenda item, not like just 5 or 6 agenda items, in order that council has the ability to spend the time speaking in those agenda items that you wish, and not having an agenda with 15 or 20 items that you feel rushed. So you only have 6 agenda items this afternoon, in order you can spend the time speaking to those at the length you need to debate those and discuss those, like we've just gone through the 2 operating capital. Those 2 operating capital budgets are year ends are very significant on how we move forward with what that may look like for the 2020 budget. So that's why we wanted to bring them forward to today. The schedule, and then the last parts of the budget today will be regards infrastructure operations, which is what we understood was what council was looking forward to have those discussions on infrastructure and budget, and today is a mix of both. The June 3rd start off will be strictly on the budget, and the June 10th will be on the water supply master plan.
Follow-up, Councillor Getchus.
Will this schedule be also during the election year, in the next election year, or are we going to change it again where there are no more budget meetings earlier and then we have it crammed again?
I can't foreshadow what's going to happen for the next election year. This is we're trying to lengthen this now outside of an election year. The challenge being for an election year is depending on who is running, may be running. We do get into a lame duck situation that the council, if there's enough candidates running against each other, we can't go forward and have you looking at forecasts or approving things for the following year. So traditionally, municipalities, or even setting direction. So if we were to come to council, this council in June, and May is when the election nomination open, or close, right?
Open in July.
Right, so after July, this council, if we're in a lame duck situation, couldn't give direction to staff to project for the 2023 budget, because you'd be in a lame duck situation. So anything between July and the election, depending on who's running, if you look at some municipalities where they had no competition and everybody was going to be the same candidate or counselor, then you can continue those discussions. We were in a lame duck situation with the amount of candidates we had and who may or may not be on council. And so therefore, this council couldn't give direction for the 2023 or the 2019 budget until you were then moved into office the first week of December, and that's when we started those discussions immediately with it. And that's just unfortunately the timing of the election and how that works each year.
Other questions from councillors? On this report, on the timeline? Okay, then we're going to, on 6.3, we have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve the 2020 budget schedule, and I need a mover for that. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by, oh, sorry, Councillor McElwain. And all in favor? Opposed? Okay, carried. So then we move to 6.4, which is a report on the 2019 Rural Road Maintenance Program, and we have, I'm going to assume Colin is going to take over that one.
Yeah,
And,
thanks,
turn to you.
Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Rob and I, we've got Rob Rosso as well here. We're just going to tag team that one if that's all right. So I'll do some introduction here. The report before you just kind of outlines our Rural Road Maintenance Program for 2019. And as council will recall, through the capital budget process, there was an additional focus put on the rural road system. And just to summarize quickly, $690,000 from an urban road, the tax-supported portion of that project was allocated to additional maintenance gravel to the amount of $370,000, and then also the gravel road rebuild to A gravel for the Aramasa West Gary town line from 6th line to Wellington Road 26 was accelerated. So that project was moved forward from, it was in 2020, it was moved to 2019. The third component, which was in the budget and approved by council, was $160,000 for a rural road rebuild. And as council is aware, we leveraged this amount. This is actually about, I think, closer to a $300,000 project, because we're able to leverage the aggregate donated by Hydro One a few years back from a project that they did in Guelph. So we've stockpiled that material at our yards, and we're using that as part of our rural road rebuild for this. So we've got 2 locations that we've identified this year for rebuilds, and our first one is Side Road 5 in former Pilkington, between the 1st and 3rd lines. And then the second part is 4th line of Nickel, which is just kind of south of Fergus, or south of Elora, I guess, between Side Road 6 and Wellington Road 7. And just in summary, these projects total represent an investment of $1.2 million in the township's rural road network in 2019. So yeah, be happy to bring Rob up to the podium if there's questions he would be better suited to answer, but we'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Good. Colin, do you have a report or a list of roads that you're picking from in order to say these are the highest need roads that we're walking through?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. So attachment A is a map that visually depicts where maintenance gravel will be applied in 2019. It also shows where we're doing the rebuilds, and also there's some paving of in the rural that we're doing this year. So this is all shown on attachment 1. It's entitled 2019 gravel maintenance. Yeah.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, I was just curious. Just like every other project, we have a priority list, right? Are you using some type of priority list for these gravel roads as well? The map is great because once I pull it up, I'm like, okay.
Yes.
that
Yeah.
helps.
So we do a sequential. We do a sequence around the township, and essentially, it's pretty evident with this drawing. There's really nothing allocated for West Garry north of the lake this year. That's because they got a fair substantial amount of gravel last year, right? So this kind of the former Aramasa Township. There's definitely a focus there, and then Pilkington and Nickel as well. So where the gravel is focused, I might get Rob up here to kind of speak to some of the criteria that we use to identify where the gravel is placed.
Hi, everyone. So some of the criteria we use is it's based on what the operators see out there on a day-to-day basis. So we try to cover approximately 20 to 25% a year of maintenance gravel. And as Colin mentioned, West Garry was hit last year, and so everything south of the lake, including 3 West Garry roads, will be targeted this year. Nickel will be targeted south of Elora into Fergus. Some other factors are customer complaints that come in. Roads this year, as we all, I'm sure, have heard, were in pretty poor condition with the frost coming out of the ground and things like that. So it's a 5-year cycle essentially. So that's basically how the program has been working in the past. If that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Councillor. Rob, how many kilometers, what's the total kilometers of gravel roads in the township?
Approximately 200, and Center Wellington's 250.
So our mayor has told us we're going to do half the gravel road network. How thick will we put the gravel on these roads? What's the depth?
approximately 10 centimeters or 4 inches, which works out to approximately 1,000 tons of gravel per kilometer.
Sorry, Councillor Foster, can you turn your mic on?
So the total mileage in red indicated on the map, what's the total kilometerage on the, indicated in red on the map?
It's not quite half. It's probably in the neighborhood of about 65 kilometers.
That's about a quarter. 65 by 250?
Well, it'd be, yeah, a
It's
little
less than
more.
a quarter. Am I right? So
We
we're
have
gonna do-
250
so we're gonna
kilometers
put
and we're
maintenance gravel on
targeting
65.
65 kilometers, I think it is.
But if I'm hearing you right, Rob, we're gonna put gravel on 65 kilometers indicated in red on this map.
Yep.
The total is 250 kilometers. I guess ultimately, Rob, my concern is that if we do this has been an ongoing problem for at least 10 years.
Since
If not-
1999.
Well, exactly. So if we spread this too thin, we're not going to accomplish much. So I want to ensure that it's thick enough to give us something, to make some improvements. So if you do the math, if we spread the 54,000 tons across half of our road network, and you've told us it's 250, so if we spread the 54,000 tons on 125 kilometers, it's only that works out to less than an inch thick.
It's a skiff, essentially, yes.
That won't accomplish much, in my
Oh, I
opinion.
agree. That's why we're doing 4 inches across approximately 65 to 70 kilometers, which will make a difference.
So we're gonna spread the 54,000 on 64 kilometers. Am I correct?
It's in the area of about, 65 to 70 kilometers.
Okay.
And when we did speak about that, we had talked about doubling our gravel road, that budget, when we took the numbers together. But I could see that we also have, some of that funds went towards a road rebuild as well, which would reduce how much gravel, because the funds are going to a certain section rebuild. So obviously, we're not gonna do all 50% as we originally intended, but we will be repairing some roads with some very, very drastic problems, right? So you can see, I think it's a good point. We don't wanna just skip it across. But it sounds like we've reduced it in order to do a good job with it. So it's good. Good point. Other questions? Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen. I was wondering why First Line in West Gary, I mean, I don't know how many complaints you get about First Line, but I get a lot of complaints about First Line. And I'm just wondering why there isn't any gravel being put on that road. Also, on Side Road 10, I don't know how your graders could not miss Side Road 10 in Ward 3. That road is just mud. There's hardly any gravel on that road. And I'm just wondering why you don't have any rehabilitation on that. And I'm sort of wondering why it's all concentrated in one area in Ward 6, which probably is 50% of all the gravel that we're allocating. And there are certain parts, I just wonder, I don't know how you could say that, let's say Side Road 10 in Ward 3 doesn't need gravel. Like it's almost impassable.
Is that the Side Road 10 that's straight off the First Line there? It kind of runs into,
It's in Ward 3, they're off BB line.
okay.
There's only 3 farms on there, but you want to go to the highway and don't want to go through town. It's like almost, is there some reason why that, that can't have gravel? Like, I mean, I couldn't drive on that road, basically.
I'm just going through my history here. So Side Road 10 from BD line across to Jones Baseline. Towards Geary Road? So Side Road 10 from Geary Road across received 1,000 tons of gravel in 2017 for that stretch.
why, when it receives gravel, 1,000 tons is not very much, first of all. But why is that road impassable now? Like it was impassable this spring? Like when we put the gravel on, why is that almost impassable? Like what, is there some base problem, like lower, that hasn't been dealt with?
Well, I think part of the problem is we've gotten away from what our quantities used to be pre-amalgamation. So pre-99, the information I was able to gather was we used to apply approximately 70,000 tons of gravel on these roads when each of the municipalities had their own sections to look after. So after that, gravel was decreased to approximately 18,000 tons for the entire township. So although we did do 1,000 tons on that block in 2017, it has helped, but when you go through spring, you get the frost boils coming out of the ground, the surface is soft, the gravel gets pushed in, and what you end up with is a very slushy, not slushy, but soft surface. It's, yeah, it kind of looks like mud. Once the frost is gone and if the weather cooperates with us, that will turn around and become a very good surface again. But it is a problem we're facing.
Thank you. Councillor Kitchus, one more, and then Councillor McElwain.
I'd like to recommend that we have a report on the amount of gravel for rural roads, because 71% of all the kilometers that we have are rural roads, and if we've been shortchanging them, that's why we're now having this. And so I'd like to have a report about the amount of monies, tons of gravel, so that we can, in the future, make sure that we're not just having this 1 year of gravel allocation, but that we do really the proper amounts. Because like Rob said, you applied 1,000, but I'll say that road is still unpassable. Mm-hmm. And so there's a problem there, that we just we haven't been allocating for the rural residents. I live in the rural, so I'm concerned about that.
Councillor Dunsmore, is that to that?
You can go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Can I just reframe the question for you a little bit, see if that, I'd rather see staff work at coming back for a recommendation of saying what would be the goal or the objective of the amount of tonnage versus going back and looking at what we haven't done. I'd rather say to staff, I would rather have us spend the time and say, given the amount of kilometers we have now and what we know our road conditions are, what would it take for the next 5 years to allocate funding? Because that's the objective we saw coming out of the budget, was that council wants us very much to put more money towards the rural road program. Council made a decision to cancel one project and redistribute money to the rural roads. So staff know what that will probably take with regards to rebuild, no different than 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we brought forward the bridge program because we were not putting enough money into the bridge program. A couple years after that, we put money into repaving of the urban roads, and now we're catching up with getting to the urban roads. And now the rural program, I agree with you, has not been addressed for many, many years due to council's decisions with regards to funding for each year. So if that's something you would like us to look at, we could bring that report back.
Councillor McElwain, is yours related to this? Your question, is it related to this one?
Yeah.
Follows? Okay,
Yes.
all right, go ahead, and then Councillor Dunsmore.
I guess my question has to, you mentioned the side road 4 is going to be rebuilt, I think you said, between County Road 7 and 6th line. So what does that mean exactly? Will it being rebuilt, does it put a new base on it? Does it mean the gravel will last longer than over the years? And because it like the one that Stephen mentioned, it's impassable 2 or 3 times this past fall and winter, so.
Yeah, so the goal will be similar to what we did on the first line of West Gary, where we reconstruct the intersections and put a proper base in, and then what we essentially do is we know the history of that section, so we'll excavate the really bad spots and put a new base in, and then we'll add a new base to the existing surface and increase that by probably 300 to 400 millimeters, and then put a probably 150 or 6 inches of A gravel on the top. And then we go back and we re-ditch everything so we get some proper drainage, and it'll make a substantial difference.
So what is, I mean, how much more expensive is it? Should we be doing that instead of just adding 4 inches of new gravel year after year? Should we be, some of the worst roads, should we be doing that rebuild more often or more quickly? And the roads that aren't as bad, kind of putting them off, or, you know, what the question is, basically.
Yeah, that would be ideal, but what we're finding is through some swampy areas are the worst targeted areas. If we can get to a point where we're adding, 4 to 6 inches of gravel at a substantial quantity, I think a lot of these problems will go away. Because essentially you're raising that road every couple of years, and it almost creates its own new base.
I think a report, as Andy had mentioned too, will bring forward some of those questions. They'll bring their recommendations. I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Dunsmore.
So, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that pre-amalgamation you were using 70,000 tons, and now we're using 18,000.
No, after amalgamation, it was around 16, 18,000. Last year, we put down 24.
Last year we put down 24, but pre-amalgamation when they were doing 70.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, West Gary was putting down like 30,000 tons. Nickel was 20.
So we don't need a report to tell us that we've let down the rural roads and the rural residents of this community. That's obvious. We get the phone calls every day. That's obvious. So my question, and Andy's report may bring that information forward, is I'd like to know how much money you need to fix the problem so that we can budget for the problem, so that we are treating them the way they need to be treated and get them good value for their tax money. If that means we have to double your budget to 2.4 million or more, we need to know those numbers. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad we're having the conversation.
Absolutely. We'll pull that together.
That's exactly the information I was thinking. We would look at, similar like the pavement management, we would look at what are some of the high areas where, to answer Councillor McElwain's question, what would be the top 10 to say we need the total rebuild, which ones can we continue with the road graveling program, which ones would come first, how do we phase in a program? We're not going to be able to afford it all in 1 year. How do we bring in a phased in program? And my suggestion to you would be that would be something that we would bring a report to one of the budget meetings and have that discussion, so we can have that discussion as part of the pre-budget.
Councillor McRae.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. This is to Colin. Colin, this morning I sent you an email with some documents attached. One of them talked about establishing a gravel road management system. So further to what I'm hearing here is, I'm just wondering if we do not have one in place, maybe that's something, after you've had a chance to review that document, is that something that we should consider for our community as having an actual system in place?
I'm sorry, a gravel road,
Gravel road management systems, similar to having a pavement management system, where you actually have a database inventory of the roads, the various conditions of each road, sort of the thickness of gravel, so that you're able to evaluate structural adequacy and benefits.
through Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Yeah, for sure. That's a great suggestion. I think going forward, we should be like the kind of the areas that Rob referenced that are kind of problem areas each year. Just like we track our problem asphalt surfaces and problem water mains, and we should take those same principles, which are really asset management principles, and apply them to the gravel road network. Historically, we haven't done that, but I think as part of the management plan to move forward with the rural roads, I would agree that that needs to be part of it.
Councillor Kittrus.
Thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen. I agree, Andy. I think that's a good idea for the plan going forward. I would like to still know what has been applied in the past in conjunction with that. I would like to also know what the funds for tar and chip are and all of the asphalt, all the whole thing, so that we can get a full picture and then know how far we are behind and then know how far we're going in the future to alleviate this problem.
Okay, so we're content then that we'd like a report and we can bring that into a budget. Yeah, you want that in a formal resolution? Yeah, we do. So do you want a motion to make to have that report come forward?
So I've got something sort of
Okay.
that maybe you can play with.
Okay, so I'm going to read this. It says that council directs staff to bring forward a report outlining the current condition of gravel roads within the township and provide cost estimates and an estimated time frame to bring all the gravel roads to a satisfactory state. And furthermore, that a gravel road management system be established. Like that. So it kind of captures a few pieces. Do you want to say something in the report about?
Yeah, just right in the beginning, a report of what we have done and then the future. Like that's the full future.
Can it be a
Historical data.
high level historical data?
Just so we're clear, probably what we'll do is do it in a couple of, like, 5, 10, 15-year timeframes, not every single year, that's a lot of work to go back to do that, but we'll try to get a framework that pre-amalgamation, 5 years after, something like that, just to give a basis to make those decisions for the forward.
The thing is Rob says something that is actually quite disturbing, that we've had this record and then now we're kind of, so I just want to make sure that we know how much more we have to do. Like, we can see the data that we really need to pay attention to these rural roads.
Councillor Foster, did you have something to add to this motion or to change? In relation to this motion or afterwards? General? Okay, so can we finish with this motion and then we'll have, do you want to put that motion, so let me read it one more time. And then we'll get it on the table, the motion. So that's fine. That the council directs staff to bring forward a report outlining historical data, the current condition of gravel roads within the township, and provide cost estimates and an estimated time frame to bring all the gravel roads to a satisfactory state. And further, that a gravel road management system be established. So I need a mover and a seconder to put that on the table. So I'll, Councillor Kittredge and Councillor Dunsmore, and questions from Council. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that motion needs to have in there something in the effect of what is the minimum standard? For example, I believe we need to see 3 to 4 inches of gravel applied every third or fourth year. So going forward, that needs to be our target. Can we incorporate that into the motion?
That's part of your gravel management system.
And I would like that information first to come from staff, that we're not directing and saying we want 6 inches and then we realize that there's a different standard out there. So I think we should leave it to staff if we can agree on that. So, okay. So is any other questions towards that motion? No? Okay, so all in favor of that motion? Yeah, we did. Yeah. Okay, good. That is passed. Other questions in regards to this, the rural road maintenance one?
Yeah, just to receive this report.
That's right. We still need to receive the report. I believe Councillor Foster had a general question, so.
Thank you, Councillor. Question again for Rob. Rob, how much tonnage do you need to get 4 inches on a kilometer of gravel?
So I calculate a kilometer, which is 1,000 meters by 6 meters wide and 10 centimeters deep, and it comes out at just a little over 1,000 tons per that kilometer, for that kilometer.
So that's going to give you 54 kilometers?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so thanks, Rob, and thanks, Colin, for that report. So we still need to receive this report on 6.4, so we have a recommendation yet. So that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receive as information details on the township's 2019 rural road improvements, including maintenance gravel, rural road rebuilding, and asphalt resurfacing, and I have a mover, Councilor Dunsmore, seconded by Councilor McCray. All in favor? Good, that's carried. And then we go to 6.5, which is our bridges report from 24WG, first line, and 4WG, fifth line. We have the municipal class environmental assessment update, and we will pass that to Colin.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. So this is an information report for council, just providing an update on the municipal class environmental assessment for two structures. So Bridge 24WG on the first line and 4WG on the fifth line. They're both bowstring structures, so they have the arch that's visible on both sides of the bridge. And so this is really just providing an update in the process. We issued a notice of study commencement last November. We also had display boards out at the, if you attended the April 24th Key Projects Open House, we had the display boards essentially kind of presenting the challenge or the opportunity of this project. So we also had a study area overview, some photos depicting the existing conditions, not only with the two bridges themselves, but also the natural environment. There were some drawings on the stream hydraulics, and also we've done kind of the first step in the heritage process, as these are bowstring bridges. It's kind of a couple step process that we use to evaluate the cultural heritage significance of these structures. And the first step is a share. So that's the acronym. It's nothing to do with Sonny and Cher, but it's a cultural heritage evaluation report. So that's kind of sets the framework or the evaluation for the structures, and kind of researches a lot of the history of the structures, who built them, why was this method of construction used, why was this style of bridge used, looks at the context that these structures are into, the importance of the structures to the community, and also identifies whether or not they're significant cultural heritage assets within the community. And so as we are evaluating alternative solutions to address the problem or opportunity statements, we can refer back to these kind of this baseline data, the cultural heritage evaluation report, to help us inform our evaluation. And essentially at this stage, again, we're kind of early stages. Usually we report later in the process, but we thought we'd provide this update kind of early on at our first round of consultation. We have 4 options currently that we're looking at. So our EA guidance tells us we need to look at the do nothing option. That's a standard thing that we look at for every environmental assessment. We're also looking at rehab of the existing structures. Option 3 is replacement of the existing structures, and option 4 is remove these structures and retire the road at the water crossing. And so all of these will be evaluated against a set series of criteria. And the township is working with SEMA, who are the bridge engineers, kind of running with this study. And yeah, just for information, I've got the display boards as an attachment, in case you couldn't make it out to the PIC back on April 24th, and also the draft cultural heritage evaluation reports for both structures are included. And just in terms of kind of next steps, like where do we go from here? Again, we're kind of early stages. We are gathering as much input and feedback as we can. We've heard from the community. We've heard from some of the agricultural community in that area that has expressed concern about getting to their fields. We've certainly heard from a few residents out there that are now having to go to the next road further to the west, and then onto the busy county road with their agricultural equipment to get, because the one on Fifth Line has a height limiter on it, so that is causing some distress, some inconvenience to the farming community in that area. So we've got the shares. We are, in terms of next steps, tomorrow night actually, meeting with the Heritage Committee. They have been provided the draft share reports, and so we are going to sit down with them. We do with the project manager from SEMA, and just have a discussion on those two structures, and get as much input as we can from the Heritage Committee. So again, to help inform the evaluation. So once we got all that input, kind of the next steps are to complete the evaluation, come up with a preliminary preferred alternative that would looks at the technical issues, social, environmental, and financial impacts. And then, of course, report back to council at that stage with that preliminary recommended alternative, seek council endorsement, and then upon approval, proceed with the project, whatever it may be. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Good, I'll turn it off. So Andy wants to comment.
Yeah, just a couple comments specific to new councillors. When we first started the bridge rebuilding program, we basically funded the design, approvals, and construction all in the same year. And we were moving through those fairly quickly, and we did find in one year in particular, we did have a couple of bridges that came over significantly over budget. So we've gone back and looked at that process, and that's why you're seeing us now asking for pre-budget money, pre-design and pre-approval. So we basically are getting these to be shovel-ready for the years that they're identified in the capital levy project bridge building program, that they'll be ready, and we'll be ready for those to go to tender early in the year so we can get the best pricing that we can get those. So we've looked at that process, we've reevaluated it, we've made some changes to it, and then identified funding in our budget process to be able to walk us through that process. In the last couple of years, we haven't seen bridges coming in substantially more because we followed this new process, which I think has helped us with the approval process as well as the consultation in the community and getting construction done more efficiently.
Could add, maybe Lisa could pull up just a few photos. Just had, the flooding. I know we haven't had a lot of urban flooding, but definitely in the rural, we've been impacted by flooding. And I don't know if all the councillors were aware of this, but this is a photo taken, I think it was May 2018, the spring kind of freshet that we experienced there. So you can see this is first line, just a little bit south of the Bowstring Bridge. The drainage area for this is Irvine Creek, by the way, is huge. It goes into Wellington North. It's a large area. It's very flat topography in this area too. So you want to just advance to the next one. Like that's what the road. I don't know how our foreman took this photo. I hope he was safe and wearing a life jacket. But yeah, it's significant amount of flow. The bridge deck was above water. You can't see it, it's just behind in this photo, but it's a significant amount of water that comes through this Irvine Creek watershed. So definitely as we're designing in the new structures, we need to make sure we're accommodating these extremely high flows that we're seeing in the air. I think we've got maybe one more that shows some of the road. Damn, ooh. Yeah, okay, I didn't, this is first line. This is first line. Is that we're close? Yeah, okay.
Just north of that first bridge.
Yeah, just north. So this is May. This is like last year. This is we had similar flooding in June 2017 as well. So that's back-to-back years where we just I don't think we could find any photos of that, unfortunately. But similar condition, back-to-back years, the same. Yeah, same event, very same event. Yeah. So, yeah, yes, that's right.
Councillor Dunsmore, do you have a question?
just out of curiosity, when something like this happens, does the province give us any money to fix it?
Yeah, in this case, in this case, no. Like we set up, I think in this case, an emergency capital project to repair the damage to the road. Essentially, I think it was it 40,000? 40 or 45 to repair the road from this flood. Because essentially, yeah, we had gravel for kilometers in the field downstream. And so yeah, we had to do a lot of work. We installed a couple of additional crossroad culverts to allow more flow, hopefully under the road, as opposed to overtopping it. Yeah, the province, we have had successful ODRAP applications to the province. The ice storms are the ones that ring a bell. I think we've had 2 successful applications there. But for this one, I don't recall if we applied. I don't think we did for this
Sorry,
one.
just following up,
Yeah.
Colin. So we, because this was an isolated situation, we were fortunate. We didn't have it like Drayton. As Colin mentioned, during the ice storms, we did apply. I can tell you the Ministry of Municipal Affairs actually uses our ODRAP applications as the benchmark of what they're applying for. We're one of the few municipalities that have, in the last 5 years, applied twice now for ODRAP, and we've received all the funding that we've requested. There is a formula based on the percentage, if you don't look to Mark, based on our percentage of our overall operating budget, or some formula with regards to how much we claim, and then beyond that, there's another percentage that we can claim. But in our last 2, and full credit to everybody, all our staff, our finance people, I think there were 2 binders about this big that went into the province, and we received funding for all of the requests that we've made. But these local events, the province, that it's within your ability to deal with it as you're operating. It's only significant where you're talking hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s that they'll support.
Councilor McRae?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen. Colin? When you rehabilitate a bridge, are you able to restore it to the full load, or is there typically a restriction?
Through Deputy Mayor Van Leeuwen, it depends. So it depends on the nature of the rehabilitation. So of course, where we can, we do. So it tends to be more of a significant rehabilitation, like a superstructure replacement, where we're basically taking off the bridge deck, the barriers, the girders, and replacing it. And in that case, for sure, that rehabilitation would eliminate any load restrictions. In the case of the bowstring bridges, the rehab that we did with what we call 9N on the Portage Road, Irvine Street, again over the Irvine River, that one we did not do a rehab that would remove the load restriction. Just given the nature of the traffic in that area, we decided not to, and the additional cost associated with basically all the structural members would need to be reinforced somehow in order to remove that load restriction. So we decided not to go that route. So rehabs in a lot of cases, it's a lot of chipping and patching the concrete is what some of the rehabs involved, and if that's the case, then the load restriction doesn't get removed. But if it's again a significant replacement, superstructure replacement, or we're actually going in and reinforcing structural members, then there's the opportunity to reduce or eliminate the load restriction, but obviously there's a cost doing that as well.
Good, thanks, Colin. So we have a recommendation for this section of 6.5, which is that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receive as information an update on the municipal class environmental assessment for bridges 24WG, which is the first line, and 4WG, which is the fifth line. So mover, Councillor Dunsmore, Councillor McRae as seconder, and all in favor? Good, and that carries. Then we also need a motion to adjourn, which is Councillor Kittredge, second by Councillor Dunsmore, and all in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you very much.